Good morning, everybody that's already joined us, or midday for anyone in New Zealand. My name is Robyn Francis. I am the Regional Lead for Smart Cities Council in Asia Pacific. I'm really excited to get into this webinar because there's so much meat that we're going to cover. Just before we start, would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm joining from. So for me, that's the Jagera and Turrbal people, and would like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Our speakers today are joining from a couple of different places around Australia and New Zealand. I'll go from the left for me. So Grace De Leon, Innovation and Improvement Manager at Christchurch City Council. Matt Gijselman, Director for Infrastructure Policy Advancement for Asia Pacific at Bentley Systems. Keri Niven, Principal at Oricon New Zealand and Smart Cities Council Task Force Lead for Digital Twin Maturity, and Sam Wiffen, founder of Reveal and also Task Force Chair for Smart Cities Council, focusing on subsurface spatial optimization. So I've invited these speakers to join us today for a panel style discussion. We want to take off any labels around digital twins, digital engineering, wherever we can, and really encourage some honest, open discussion and provide a canvas for us to dig into operational digitalization, the tools, capability, delivery, and learning as a primary. So to kick us off, I'm going to go first to Sam. The value of digitalization for all of us is not in question, in my opinion. Data sharing, data centralization, for example, in the city council, not in question. I think we all agree that it's vital. The practicalities though of how to get started, where to start, the costs, implications, those are the pieces, that are key, particularly when inheriting a digital project. So question for you is if you agree that the evolution of digital as a means to an end is correct, and what is the ultimate end goal?
It's essential. There's no way about it, right? If we start to look at the performance of infrastructure projects and assets and all the different challenges that we've got, headwinds globally, in order to meet up with growth and demand and failure of utilities and infrastructure and performance in cities, and growth that we have to think exponentially, and the only way we can do that is through a digital baseline. So gone are the days of paper. They still exist now. I'm not being naive, but that happens a lot, and there's a lot of resistance to it. But the return, yes, is there. I'm not sure if I'd say it's a means to an end. It has to be the status quo, it has to be the default in the way we operate.
Grace, Keri, do you want to add anything there?
Yes, I agree with what Sam said. For us as a council, it's all about better outcomes for communities. It's about resilience and sustainability. For example, for us in Smart Christchurch, digital tools are enablers. It helps us test, scale, and learn innovation that improves how our infrastructure serves people. And that is whether through real-time data, predictive maintenance, or smarter urban planning.
Perfect. Keri, do you want to add anything?
Probably to summarize what I think Sam and Grace are saying, and to agree with them, is that I think more now than ever, investment in digital is a business activity. It's not a digital activity. It needs to solve a problem. The definition of those problems and how urgent and important they are is an entirely different subject, but the point at which you bring digital into that discussion is once you've made those very early decisions. So that is a real change that I guess that I'm seeing. We're called in a lot later as digital specialists, called in a lot later now, and it's really great to see that work being done up front by the business.
Matt, you want to jump in?
Yeah, look, I think from my perspective, and to the point actually Keri was making, which is we need to stop thinking about digital as a noun, as a product, as something at the end, but more as a verb, as an enabler for the decisions. And I think that is, in fact, the transition that we're in. Coming back to your original point, which is it a means to an end? I think the answer is undoubtedly yes. What that end is, of course, those better decisions, but depending on where you are in the process, whether you're an asset owner, an operator, a constructor, etc., those better decisions are still the means that you're going to get from digital regardless.
Perfect. Just a note for everyone, the chat is open. So if you have any questions, pop them and then we'll try to get to them at the end. Otherwise, we can address them separately afterwards. So a question for everyone, and I'll start with Grace, and then if you want to just hand on to the next person, can you share a practical example of where digitalization has made a measurable impact on day-to-day construction or operational processes?
Yes. I actually, when I do a presentation lately, I have this image that I put up. So there is a 30-meter high fire tower. So in the 1940, there was a fire that burned through acres of pine forest in mid-Canterbury. And the solution that the state forests have actually done was to create this 30-meter high watchtower. And there's a guy there with a binocular actually looking out if there's fire and smoke happening. So that's how they were monitoring fire. But that is so 1940s, isn't it? For us now, one of the things that we have implemented is a network of early fire detection sensors. So what it enables us is it provides us faster response times, operational efficiency, and improved risk management, as well as giving a bit of peace of mind for the people around the community that are living in the area. So that's one example that I can give. And the other example that I have for us here in Christchurch, we do have earthquakes. And in the past, if there's a significant earthquake or if they are at risk building, we have to actually call an engineer to have a look at the building, assess it, and say, yes, it's safe for the building to be occupied. But now when we use those digital tools, we have sensors that now tells us that within 90 seconds of an event, we could say, okay, that building is safe to be occupied, or now we have to evacuate the building. So again, the measurable impact that we have there is reduced business interruption. You can just imagine if you have an hour or 2 hours getting all of the people in a commercial facility or an office building, how much money that is actually costing us. Or there's also improved risk management and of course providing better service for our community. So those are my two examples.
Brilliant examples. Keri, do you want to go next?
They're awesome examples to follow. What I like most about them is that they're about people. So the outcomes for people, for safety and for benefits. Yeah, to the way that we live. I know my example isn't the same as that. I was thinking, we heard just talking about digital twin for a second, because I think that conversation comes and goes and we get optimistic and then less so, depending on sort of the things that we see failing or doing well at the time. But there's a really great example in New Zealand at the moment. Speaking to Alex Hampshire a couple of weeks back about the archives building in NZ, and what I love about that, without going into the gory details of the design process, is it's an operations backwards project. So they did all of their activities around bringing the data together and making sure that it was captured in the right way and able to be used, was so that as soon as they commissioned the building, it could be operated from a base of quality data that was fit for purpose for the decisions that they needed to make. And I love that example, because if you strip it right back, there was a vision there really early on about why that is important and what the value that will add in the long term. Obviously, optimization of space and better efficiencies in building performance and all of those sorts of things stemmed out of what must have been a fascinating conversation right at the very beginning of that project, to say, how do we go on that journey together and make sure that we keep moving throughout, no doubt, quite the number of obstacles along the way. So that, I think that can give us renewed optimism about the value of a digital twin in the real sense. So that's my example.
Okay, first mention of digital twins, so 1 point for Keri. Matt, do you want to go next, and then Sam?
Yeah, sure. Look, I'll deliberately try and avoid a digital twin example, because I'm sure that they'll come out a few times. Look, I think coming back to the point we were making earlier, which is start with the why. It's always best if your digital processes are integrated into why you're actually doing the project. And there's some great examples. Crossrail is a good one of having a great digital team that they set up. And basically they've created an academy out of what they were learning as they're going through their digital processes, which literally is still goes around the world and is taking those learnings out to the projects nowadays. And in fact, to be frank with you, there's huge opportunities following, I think, the Brisbane Olympics. I think there'll be a lot of things that sort of are seen as we progress towards that major event. But also, certainly in Australia, where I am, there's a lot of very large projects that are learning a lot of really great things in terms of the digital transformation at the moment. And certainly there's opportunities to take that knowledge further. I just want to give a really great small example though, which is we are lucky enough as a company to do lots of things in relation to dams and water management. Just a really crisp example, thinking about starting with the why. There was a series of dams in California. There's a lot of these assets are coming to not their end date, but certainly they're going to need a lot of work to ensure that they keep their safety. So there's a lot of inspections going on across the California dam system at the moment. I think they've got, I'm going to get the number wrong, so I'll look it up, but they've got a lot of dams in California. We've worked with them to digitize a lot of the safety inspections. We're deploying 1,000 collection points across the Yuba Dam, for example. We've cut down the need for on-site safety inspections by about 68%. You can look at the cost benefits of that and the time benefits of that, but I think in the same breath, it's a really great example to look at the safety benefits. You're not sending divers down inside dams that may or may not be safe day after day after day. You're using the digital opportunities to look at what's available in terms of those safety inspections. Because of course, dam walls, I'm sure everyone on this call know, dam walls look like solid things. Sam's going to give me a wry smile, but of course they're living, breathing things responding to geotechnical changes, chemical changes, etc. So there's a lot of work that goes into ensuring the safety of those, and I think that's a really crisp example of how you can deploy digital.
Beautiful. Go for Sam.
Yeah, I probably want to, in the presence of people that work for very big companies, do very big things, but think about it from a practical sense. And I can talk, it's a weird one because everything I do and everything I've been exposed with has a digital component to it. And I do not think we're very good at measuring the benefit at all. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in a lot more detail. There's a lot more work to do there. But like little practical things, and it's been interesting hearing about safety and from a financial thing, a bit of a weird one. If we look at like an AI revolution, what's the cultural piece to a lot of people in an aging workforce? We've got an enormous amount of embodied knowledge and people that have worked on these assets for years and years. And Keri knows is one of my favorite ones. Walking around with people with a dictaphone and telling them, tell me about this utility, tell me about this asset, tell me about this pump, and recording that, because we know at some point in the future with an audio file associated with that particular asset, we can run machine learning models over the top of that to try and start to extract that. And people are able to capture the stories that they have. People bring a lot of passion and energy and ownership to what they do every day. It's quite a romantic and quite nice way for people to tell a story about what they do and also capture that to a digital sense. As well, we've got a lot of the operational models of infrastructure revolve around purchase orders and people out and going doing things. And that's the temporal component around which we learn around these. And IoT sensors are a phenomenal way to capture performance in a very granular way, as opposed to a very human goes out and looks at a thing, but dynamically understanding the changing of those assets. Like you look at Grace's ordered fire tower, what is that asset now? Does that change now that it's not a fire tower anymore? So the evolution of those things is pretty interesting. I can talk about millions of examples, but probably from a granular perspective, digitizing the human stories is a huge one.
Something I think that doesn't get talked about a lot is what happens when things go wrong. I'm not necessarily asking you to do that because I know that's risky, but can I ask you all to share the most important lesson or a significant lesson that you've learned in deploying digital tools on live projects? I guess more to help everyone else avoid early missteps, but if you have a big lesson, and mine, weirdly enough, have all come from you, like Grace, design with, not for. Do you want to go first, Grace?
Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is technology alone doesn't drive change. It's people who do. you could implement the shiniest, fanciest, latest, innovative solution. But if you don't have buy-in from the people, it's just going to be a shiny, fancy thing that's sitting there. One of the examples that I actually come up is around, say, we want Christchurch to be a smart city. So what are we going to do? Let's remove all of the parking meters and let's just get people to use an app to pay for parking. But then not everyone is going to use it, and we're just going to get a lot more complaint because everyone is just, oh, that doesn't work for me. So I think for me, some of those, the first thing we need to ask is what is the problem that we're trying to solve? I think that's the very, very first thing. Then we involve the right people from the beginning, making sure that the digital tools that we are actually going to implement are intuitive, relevant, and we support people with training, because sometimes we can put it out there and we just let it be. And then for us in Smart Christchurch, we do quite a lot of co-design with users. So who will be the end user? So it has to be a co-design process. And one of my advices would be, don't treat digitalization as a tech rollout. It's not a tech rollout. Treat it as a change journey. Yeah. Build trust, show quick wins, and make sure that the solution fits the people, not just the process.
Oh, tough one to follow. Keri, do you want to go next?
100% agree with Grace. I was going to say, don't overestimate maturity. It's pretty much the same thing, isn't it? And even, I guess, from my experience working on the design side, even though you might have a team of designers, our maturity isn't the same. Same label, very different maturity. And I guess everybody has a different worldview around what's important. So my example was going to be specific. So investment in digital does not necessarily equal the outcome that you thought it was going to provide. So for example, if you're trying to invest in improvements in asset management capability, don't necessarily presume that investing in a digital thing or things is going to give you those outcomes unless you are very specific about what the outcome is that you're looking for and work backwards through process and people and data and lastly systems. Then you're more likely to get the outcome that you're looking for. And to summarize that, I guess I would be saying that value is in the eye of the buyer and the owner. So the more that we can help, consulting hat on for a second, the more that we can help uncover what that value looks like and then be really specific about, okay, those are all of the shiny things that you could do, but here is the one thing that you must or should do that will unlock those future things. And unfortunately, to Grace's point, if that first thing is investing in a big program of maturity uplift, so be it. It's worth spending the time.
Beautiful. Matt?
My variation of the theme is it's about the people, is you got to meet people where they are. I think generally the resistance to, quote unquote, digital is not in and of itself resistance to digital. It's actually resistance to the disruption that it can cause. And if you are working with people to understand where their friction points are people and organizations, to understand where their friction points are, and you're deploying solutions that can help resolve those frictions, and also to give experienced people better tools to do what they can in a better fashion, then I think you can at least address some of that friction and the concern. But yeah, again, coming back to, we're all talking about variations on the theme, which is what is the human element and how do you address that? Be that understanding what your objectives are, understanding, how to go about implementation or understanding what your long-term goals are. It all comes back to understanding the people involved.
Yeah, and then making it personable. There's a really great example I was given at a Bentley roundtable a couple of months ago, and we were speaking about exactly that, meeting people where they are. So someone who just needs a 2D drawing to do a very specific job doesn't need to access all of the digital, but they can go along on the journey and understand why it's happening, as long as you still give them the piece of information they need to do their job. Sam, do you want to
go? Yeah, the people one's real tricky, right? To be honest, it's at the heart of the challenge is you're asking for like learning or lessons, right? And these are all founded on, have a foundation on things that actually happened. So definitely at risk of throwing people and organizations under the bus, which I'm not going to do. But apathy to change and apathy to like horrific systems is alive and well. Like, I've seen millions of dollars wasted on digital initiatives that just don't get used because people go, well, we've never done it before. I can't really sort of trust this data. Let's just go back and do it the old way. Like, it really comes down to those systemic, like the operating models. If you're going to implement something that's new in an operating model, you're going to piss some people off because some people are not going to have to do what they used to do, and some other people are going to have to do either some more things or less things. And there needs to be some bravery above that level to understand there's going to be that friction and to just rip the Band-Aid off and make it happen. That bravery needs to occur. Otherwise, we can go around and give everyone lots of cuddles and say, we've still got a job to do here, this sort of stuff. But the apathy is still there. We're still seeing millions of dollars wasted on digital initiatives. This is not being used. I can talk around big infrastructure projects where the data was torched and the flames went up. So sorry to bring a kind of like negative approach to it all, but like the lessons, we're not learning from the lessons enough.
Yes.
So let's stay with you then, Sam. So let's talk about value delivery. What tools or approaches are proving valuable in enabling visualization, interoperability, scenario modeling in operational infrastructure and having some kind of lasting effect?
Yeah, value is subjective, and that's a real tough thing for us to grapple with. Do we talk around like value with respect to the environment? We may as well just wipe out cities. Like, or the subjective approach to the way that we determine value is dynamic and needs to be measured. But then how do we measure that? And we're entering this interesting phase where one of my key things I love talking about is the paradox of prevention. And you'll roll your eyes because these guys have heard me talk about it a lot. We spend a whole lot of money preventing a whole lot of bad things from happening, and the best case scenario is nothing happens. And we're sitting there going, where's the thing? And we need to be, when we suffer long feedback loops, like we don't actually see the benefit of that, how do we measure that ROI in a very short feedback loop? How do we say, oh, we prevented that decision, here's the ROI of that particular decision? If we look at in terms of digital aspects and deploying that using machine learning and artificial intelligence across that, we can start to understand our baseline or create a synthetic baseline as to how good or how bad we're going. The return on investment or the value is derived from that point. So that's really the big area I see there's a lot of benefit for us to understand that value from here.
Chris, did you want to add anything there? If we're talking about measuring success or ROI, how do we make sure it's translated into value across an org?
Yeah. So for us, we measure success by asking the questions of, did this make the operation smarter, faster, or safer? And for us, ROI isn't just financial. When I talk about the earthquake monitoring, for example, sometimes it's so hard to actually say, okay, in the next 3 years, our return on investment on this is this, because Sam mentioned about the paradox of prevention. If we didn't have any significant earthquake in the next 5 years, does that mean that we have wasted that investment? So I think one of the things that we could probably, what we do is we have to measure what matters to our people, not just what looks on the dashboards. Yeah, it looks good on the dashboard that we didn't have earthquakes, but probably telling that story as well, how that solution has prevented some of those, like the near misses, for example, some of those things that, okay, there was magnitude 3 or 2 earthquake and it actually had this impact in that particular building. So if we track those throughout the time, we don't have to wait for a significant one to say, okay, we have a problem with that building. So I think the return on investment is somehow tracking that. And it's not just about financials. And I think it's very important, which is storytelling. We have to make sure that we tell that storytelling, well, what we say, where we frame success, not just as nothing happened, but as something was prevented from happening.
You don't want to add anything
Right.
there? No? Okay. So let's stick on this theme then, and it will link a little bit to one of the questions we've just had in the chat. Matt, I might go to you first. In your experience and opinion, what are some of the biggest cultural or operational barriers to successful digitalisation, specifically in infrastructure. Is Matt frozen? I
Yes,
think he is.
it looks
Yeah.
like he's frozen.
Okay, we'll wait for him to come back. In the meantime, Sam, I don't know if you want to jump in on that one as well.
Barriers.
Yes.
There's nothing in it for me when you go back to the people.
Yeah.
I come from the underground world, and the people and the men and women and boys and girls that are out there working on the infrastructure, sometimes at night, huge hours, they show up to work on a subsurface digital transformation model. They show up to eat their lunch, like what's in the lunchbox. Definitely bring a lot of passion and energy to that. But I believe this is controversial in like benevolent consumerism, right? We're all consumers. And if you can, from a consumer, there's a value transaction that occurs when you want to do something. And unless we really identify what's in it for me, and I'm acutely aware of the sort of hierarchical point that I made before around pissing people off, like understanding that value, what's in it for me and why should I do that is fundamental. It has to be a very human-centric approach to operating model shifts.
Go for it, Grace.
Yeah, can I add that I think
Yeah.
one of the barriers that I would say is also around conflicting priorities. Like with the digitalization, there is a lot. Like when you look at the work program of the digital team, and then you come with a new solution, that we're just transforming. This is our work program, and you're serving them with something new. It's those conflicting priorities, and of course, budgets as well. That's biggest barrier for me.
Keri, do you want to add anything there?
I'm busily writing down the Samisms of the day. You're coming out with some crackers. I was gonna add to your benevolent consumer, which is awesome. The other way of looking at it is this. I'll see that and I'll raise you a rational self-maximizer. So basically, that is the value you get out of something has to be greater than the perceived effort that you put in. Right? It's why people eat apples and not kiwi fruits. I guess. If you're looking at that from the perspective of a client, and to Paul's question in the chat, in New Zealand, in the absence of kind of government mandates around uplifting our asset owners and giving them the rules basically to follow about what good looks like, our asset owners are really trying to get the most bang for buck, right? And so when, in terms of effort they put into their activities and the value they need to get out. So ultimately, we might say, well, as an asset owner, wouldn't it be cool if the same pool of data that served our strategic planning needs was informed by outputs from our capital projects and inputs from our ops and maintenance activities? So it becomes the self-reinforcing cycle, right? So if you took a step back from that and said, how do we get the best bang for buck out of heading in that general direction? I guess where I've thought about it previously is the bookends. How do we give really good requirements, get ourselves into a position as an informed buyer where we can give good, clear requirements to supply chain, and we can let the designers and the constructors invest in all of those fancy things like BIM and stuff. And then, but those requirements are very clear about what we want back, because our goal is to get better data about our assets in the end of the day that informs our operating model. And so those requirements need to specify the minimum expectation there. And the bookend is the quality assurance at the end that says, did you do what you said you were going to and what we were asking you to do? And I feel like if there's a place to start, that's it. It's being clear about both ends of the cycle, and then let the market do what they're good at. Let the people who are into BIM do complex BIM models, and that's cool. But of course, the intervention in that is who pays for which part. And so that might be the next step as your informed client journey that says, okay, we're sick of paying for innovation all the way around those life cycles. So our next iteration of requirements are going to be to specify what that looks like. So that, I guess that's a roundabout sort of a way of trying to define that self-maximizing approach. Yeah.
We've answered the next question to a degree. Sorry, Sam, do you want to add there?
Just, and probably Paul's question, if everyone's seeing that as well, government needs to jump in there and do that, because especially in Australia and New Zealand, where we have a lot of government funded projects, a lot of time people suffer that identity crisis of spending budget, not demonstrating value. Like, we need to spend the budget, not save money. That's real tough when that's your success metric. And then you go, okay, how are we going to fund it? If we can start to look at a real push towards digital and a real push towards open data, idiot entrepreneur here, if you start to look at that, merit will shine through. Like the businesses that start to see that will go, you know what, I can start to create these better outcomes through this new system or model or project or business or strategy to get that digital outcome. And that's I feel like that's a really big piece. Now, do I want to rely on government to drive standards and policies? For me, that's a lagging indicator, right? There's a lagging indicator based on some traction that's occurred. We really want to try and optimize business, commerce, to try and create the better outcomes for us.
So how do we get started? For a smaller or maybe less mature organization that wants to get started on a project, where do you go first without feeling overwhelmed by perceived complexity? Because to digitize a whole organization or process is a lot. What would your advice be, Keri? And then I'll go to Grace afterwards to talk about that with a view to moving beyond just pilots. So how do we get started?
I guess two sides to my answer. Firstly, as a consultant, and now secondly, having seen what the real world's like out there working as a client, realizing just how strange some of my advice must have sounded in the past. I think it's the value definition that's really important, is understanding what it sounds a bit cheesy, but what are the real problems to solve? I love the way that in New Zealand, the Queensland State Government, the investment logic mapping has been embraced by New Zealand as well now through Treasury. It's a really cool way of taking a step back and saying, let's be real about the problems. Let's think about the benefits of solving those problems in order, and then we can think about the options that we have to realise those benefits. And the very last step is down into the solutions part. And so spending time over here, what did we say we were going to do? Who are we doing it for? How important is that? Can we meet what we promised? Can we deliver on what we promised? If not, why not? How do we solve those problems? I think that there's nothing digital about that. It's a business activity, and it's something that I think the other part of my recommendation will be that is top down. So getting engagement at the very top level, at the exec level, at the C-suite level, starting with that clarity of narrative around value, I say this clearly, shouldn't be that hard, because that's why you exist in business. And so then the next steps, as I said earlier, around the specificity, what's the first thing that we can do to close that most important gap just a little bit? When do we think we can close it by? And how do we circle all the wagons around it to make sure we're on the same page about how we're going to get there? I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know that matters whether the scale of your business is gigantic or small. I think that clarity is really important.
Well, I think it's the thing that helps prevent you from going, okay, we're going to do this little slice implementation and then seeing all the possibilities, but to keep coming back without it getting distracted by what can be implemented in the long run. But it's important to be thinking about the long-term goals anyway, so that you're designing with future implementation and integration in mind. So Grace, in my opinion, there are a lot of orgs that still struggle to move beyond just pilots. What practical advice do you have for embedding digital practices at scale and then making them the way things are done?
Yes, for us, what we've learned, the key to moving beyond pilots is to design for scale from the start, even if you are starting small. So it could be small projects like thinking big, which is what, like what you have just been saying. So sometimes often pilots stay isolated because they're treated as an experiment, not part of core operations. And I could give an example of this because when I started, my very first project that I delivered in Smart Christchurch was around solar compacting bins. And we said, oh, they're very popular overseas. Let's bring them here in New Zealand and see if they're actually going to work in the context that we want to do. This is us taking that risk from our business unit, because imagine if the council ordered hundreds of them and they didn't work in the context that we wanted to work, then it's a waste of money. But then So I did a trial. So it was really good. We did a trial. We have reduced the MTM by 93%, which is significant. And so I finished the trial. I wrote a big report and I handed it to the business unit. And what did they tell me? How much does it cost? We don't have the budget for this. We didn't understand how it works. Like, even though I have written the benefits, but it's because that's the first thing that we've learned, or I've learned personally, that we have to involve the eventual owners of those assets that we're actually trying to do. To embed digital practice, I think there are three things that we have started to focus on all of the initiatives that we deliver. So the first one is it has to solve a real operational problem. So it's not just about, okay, we're going to test this technology, the solar compacting bins, but is it solving a problem? And really, for that particular area, it was solving a problem because there was a lot of complaints on overflowing rubbish bins. And then the second thing is to involve the end users early. And this is really interesting because what happened with those bins, even though we didn't involve our operational team within the council, the people in the community have seen how they function. And eventually they were the one who were actually championing it. So it was coming from the community to the council. But involve the end users early so that the solution fits their workflows and builds ownership. Because that's the thing. I could have done all of that pilot, but then if there's not going to be an owner at the end of it, then that pilot is just not going to make sense. And of course, it's showing quick wins. This can build momentum by sharing results across the organization, because then you gain allies and you get champions from your organization. So last advice, don't let pilots live in isolation. So that's my very first project. It was an isolated project. I didn't communicate with everyone in the organization. We need to connect them to real needs, real teams, and real systems from day one. I think that's my advice.
Following on that, that's awesome. First, I was going to say the popular Facebook trope of move fast and break things, but Keri and Grace are far more mature and professional than I am, and I agree and should follow that a bit more. But building on what Grace has said, focusing on the P&L, right? Whether we like it or not, like innovation, I find a lot of the times is a vanity metric. People want to be seen to be innovative, rather than using innovation for exactly what it's used for. And when you want to be seen to be innovative, the value proposition are completely misaligned. And then that's when they never move out of pilot, because everyone's, I've ticked the box, I've got the media article, away I go. But drill down on that P&L piece and who's the operator that Grace was saying. We have to be very aware that sometimes, again, we're going to annoy people. When you look at, say, hey, look, we can go and reduce your costs. I'll give you an example. A council was spending a whole lot of money on tyres, and they were on tyre replacements. They're like, why are we spending so much money on tyres? One guy had to go out and do all these inspections on this thing. They're like, oh, let's put an IoT sensor in there, achieves a better outcome, and we've reduced all the tyres. But now this person doesn't have so much travel. If you start to look at these mini sort of people fiefdoms inside organizations, if you say, hey, look, we can drop the P&L, your operating costs, because we can remove the people, there's going to be resistance from that manager, because their value to them is they are a manager of a whole lot of people and they deeply care for their team. If you go, oh, I can sort the P&L out and drop your operating cost around this one piece, you probably miss the full understanding of what that is. It might not be the end owner. It might be like understanding what the operating model would look like, and a big and how it has an impact to the P&L.
So we can't talk about anything to do with digital without talking about data. And I think we all agree that's the thing that's not talked about enough. We'll go Keri first, and then Matt, if you want to jump in as well. What strategies or frameworks are you finding helpful in facilitating data sharing across teams, orgs, or government agencies? Meaningfully sharing data.
Yeah, that's a tough question, because I would say begging, pleading.
Even sharing.
Yeah, look.
Coffee dates.
Yeah. Bribery is alive and well. Carrot sticks. No, I don't know that framework is necessarily, if you're expecting me to say something like an ISO standard, I'm not. What I think has helped in my experiences. If you map a life cycle, so say it's an asset life cycle, if you can bring the teams or people involved in the various different functions around that asset life cycle, and they can see not just where they fit, but the upstream and downstream activities that they create or influence, it has a massive difference. It creates a massive difference and an advantage when you're trying to talk about it, because otherwise people tend to stick in their swim lane or exist in their process in isolation, and giving them the opportunity to actually look at the whole thing really opens up that worldview. And I guess I loved Grace's points before, because that's really what we're talking about when you're talking about pilots. Sometimes pilots are like a proxy for a shiny thing. They're just called a pilot. And if you can't put it back into the system, it's probably not going to work, or it wasn't valid. And so when those sorts of frameworks of knowledge of the system are really important, because then you can innovate around the system, right? And it's not like a red herring or something that's just for fun's sake. So that's not a formal framework. I don't even know what you would call it. It's just taking that big picture view of what's in your operating model.
Anyone want to add there?
Yeah.
Matt?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So I think two things, and they go against each other. One is contracts. You just hear constantly all the time from people about, I'm sorry, I can't share that data because I'm not allowed to. People, I think, generally are quite concerned, what I'd say is reasonably concerned about what they're allowed to share versus what they're meant to be holding. And having an understanding of that from the get-go, building from the ground up in terms of building into your agreements the ability to share that data or build out a CDA, whatever you want to do. Sorry, we're meant to be avoiding jargon, a data environment that we can all get access to. But also, I think the other one is, that's a top-down, the other one is who needs what, when, what format. It's just a really sort of simple understanding about, you don't have to share the whole system with everyone all the time. You just want to get the right data to the right person at the right time. And so, again, we haven't spent a lot of time in today's conversation around pre-planning and what are you doing before all these projects begin. But time at the beginning is time well spent, and time understanding what you're trying to do at the beginning. And it's just a really good understanding of your sort of data needs, data governance, also flexible, because you obviously don't know where things are going to go through the process, but an understanding at the beginning about what you're expecting to happen in terms of data availability and sharing, I think is a really good start.
More chief data officers, data governance, privacy impact assessments. Grace?
Yeah. And I think I was going to add that probably one strategy that has worked for us is around starting with a shared purpose, like understanding what is it that we're trying to share, why are we sharing it, what are we trying to achieve, so why the data matters. When everyone sees the value, they are more willing to collaborate, because sometimes it's, oh, I want your data, and then they interpret it 10 million different ways on why you want their data.
Yeah, it's pretty spot on, and I've seen that raised a few times. I don't want to share my data because someone's going to interpret it incorrectly and perceive me to have done this incorrectly or argue with my hypothesis. Okay, so Matt touched on it already with the contract environment. Sam, you're working in an environment where there's a lot of data sharing needing to happen. How has that regulatory or contracting environment helped or hindered driving digital adoption?
Yeah, Grace nailed it. Data is a very small word, but brings massive connotations and at times real adverse impacts, be those through unintended consequences around sharing too much and probably more so not sharing enough. What I have found helpful is getting rid of that little word, because when I say data, let's say, for example, in terms of the underground, this big program of work we're working in across all of Australia, so we mean like very basic spatial information of utilities. But when a utility might hear that, they might hear like customer data, conveyance, criticality, all this information. So we speak cross purposes, we misunderstand that. So really breaking that down and being very clear. And there's a lot of fear involved, and that's, I'm not going to hammer anyone's fear because that's real to them. We have to work on alleviating that, and through education and also understanding what the ROI is, what the value is. One thing that we've worked on here in Australia is we've got Department of Home Affairs to issue some clarification around specific infrastructure acts to say, actually, you can't hide behind this, people, around sharing your information, because if you don't, you're not actually meeting the act. we want to do some clarification here. When acts and policies and standards kind of get thrown in the way, so really trying to get some buy-in and some clarity around what they mean and what they don't and how that works. From clearly a lot of these are going to be reasonably vague in some areas, has helped quite a lot.
So Ashley's just put a question in the chat, which is quite similar to what my next one was, which was, how do you address resistance or lack of buy-in from maybe experienced practitioners, but other people in the value chain that see digital as another initiative or just flashy tech? Who wants to go?
Well, yeah, I think stories are a real good one. I always think around use cases than case studies, and I want to try and stack up as many case studies, like real world examples. We did this, it achieved this outcome, here are all the benefits. And then looking at the benefits from a direct and indirect. So direct in terms of the project costs or your operating budgets, and indirect in terms of what happened to the environment or the amount of carbon that we're able to save. I know you can measure carbon, but we'll call it an indirect one in this scenario. So really creating those things here. But then also, like tech for tech's sake, a lot of the time in the technology industry is definitely the tail wagging the dog sometimes. Like, just because you can create a digital flashy tech thing doesn't mean you should. And if people, the sort of the shiny thing, and let's go and get, that's probably that innovation vanity metric showing up again. So being hyper aware around sometimes the real boring digital stuff returns the most value, but understanding that case study is critical.
Grace, I'm sure you've experienced this. Every conference, there's so much flashy, cool tech, and everything looks like a great idea. How do you approach this?
I agree. I agree with what Sam have just said, really showcasing that benefits to the community. And we are very much on that in the spotlight to the community. When we put something, we need to make sure that it actually adds value. A little bit on top of that, what we have actually started doing here in Christchurch is around Innovation Expo. So every year there is an event that I run that I open to the community, and no matter what happened, it's not funded by the council, but we run it cost neutral to the council, so it could continuously run. But the whole purpose of the Innovation Expo is that is an opportunity for our community to get in touch with the solutions provider, and so that they can ask those questions that they have in terms of why did they create that particular solution? So it's not just coming from us as the council that says, okay, we have that particular solution and these are the benefits, but it also have that component where they could ask directly. Because I think sometimes in my experience, what I've seen is that our community, the people in our community that don't necessarily do the work that we do, they don't understand it. Like, AI is such a big thing at the moment. If you go to our community, they think AI is actually ChatGPT, but it's not. It's more than that. The sensors that we have, the fire detection sensors, they operate with AI behind it. But it is, again, going back to that educational piece, why we're doing what we're doing. That storytelling is very important so that we can communicate that back to our community. And they just don't see it as flashy, shiny tech. And I can tell you an example we have with the fire detection sensors at one of the forests here in Christchurch. Someone was walking there, asked the park ranger, because we have this 8-meter high pole with the sensor, casually asked the park ranger, what is that thing? It's causing headache to my horses, without even actually understanding what it is. So I think educational piece is very important.
Yeah. Okay, noting time. And for anyone listening, if you have specific questions for the panelists, please send them over, because we will do some follow-up sessions. We've had a few really specific technical questions that came in prior. To wrap us up, if everyone can give us their thoughts on how we accelerate digitalization, specifically in infrastructure, and give consideration to if it's skills and capabilities, if it's upskilling, if it's addressing resistance. I'll let you give your thoughts on that. Matt, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I think when you're looking at the sort of big, hairy, audacious goals for your organization, I think it's important not to consider digitization as this other kind of thing that you do. But if you're looking at starting small, what are some of the decisions that you're making that could benefit from additional data or there's that word, Sam, additional capability to make those decisions faster and easier. Start small, build out from there, avoid pilots, look for things that are going to stick, and build them in as expected processes from there. And to circle back to the point that Sam made at the very beginning, you're going to get resistance. The leadership from the top is important as well.
Keri?
I really like what Matt said at the beginning, which is digital as a verb, not as a noun. Just accepting that it's a journey, it's an enabler of things. If you think about value as an outcome, digital as a verb, value as an outcome. The outcomes are, to Grace's point, preventing things, enabling things, solving things. Those are the outcomes for people and for place. The best advice, I guess, I would give around accelerating that is something I learned at university, the 7 Ps, proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. Have a real think about what's the value proposition, and how do you go from where you are to where you need to go with some, think about things like high leverage. What are you doing well? How do you scale it? Those sorts of things. But the planning phase is sadly the most important, from my opinion. Yeah.
Beautiful. Grace?
I think from my point of view, it's all about people. So what is the problem that we're trying to solve? It's all about people. And then when we have found the solution, it's all about people as well. Again, like how do we actually get them the buy-in, train them, educate them. And we have to make sure that whatever we do, again, all about people, no one gets left behind.
Thank you so much. Sam?
The superb governance of my peers here should be heeded, because I completely agree. And coming from the trenches, I can't help but be extremely practical. We can talk in hyperbole a lot sometimes. For what it's worth, and forget the security implications, you got people out there in the field, turn the geolocation on the photos so you know where the geolocation of the photos are if you're doing that. And I think people should start popularize the week before some person leaves an organization, go around and voice tag, get them to tell a story about the things that they've done. Because at some point, if all of this good governance that Matt, Keri and Grace have put in place, we're going to have massive databases, and we'll start to leverage off all of that digital knowledge that we've got. But capturing that digital first, capture the data in a digital way and put it in your databases, we'll be able to use it later on. They're my practical tips.
And the final one is to share case studies. And it is my lifelong mission to collect them all and share them with everyone onwards. So thank you to everyone that's here and joined us and stuck with us. Thank you to everyone that's going to watch afterwards. To our speakers, thank you so much as well. Look forward to continuing this discussion, and I hope you all have a superb day.